Morning. Okay. It's week 6. Can't keep track. It's week 6. And today we're going to be diving into Unit 2. And we begin with a section called Practicing Discernment. And so with that said, we're not going to waste a lot of time here. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. I'll pull the PowerPoint up and get us rocking and rolling. Because who doesn't want to rock and roll? I mean, I do. But we have to click all the right buttons and get things moving where they need to be. All right, now just about ready. All right, here we are, practicing discernment. All right, who, what, where, when, why, how, questions we should ask when we are discerning between things. Well, so let's talk about what is discernment. Well, discernment, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is the quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure, skill in discerning. I love it when the definition is in the definition, or the word is in the definition. That cracks me up. An act of perceiving or discerning something. So let's look at that part that doesn't have the word in it. The quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure. All right. In another spot, I found this definition. Discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It is knowing the difference between right and almost right. So it isn't trying to decide between necessarily right and wrong. It's between what's right and almost right. What's obscure, what's hard to navigate through. Okay, and so with those definitions for discernment, today we're going to do something a little different, and we're going to jump right into the story for this week. And this is A Good Man is Hard to Find. So in your textbook, it is on page 990. There is also a PDF on Blackboard. The story can be found online as well. You could type in A Good Man is Hard to Find, Flannery O'Connor PDF, and you will find it. So we are going to listen to an audiobook read by the author herself, and this is written by Flannery O'Connor. So we are going to hear this short story in the author's voice, which I thoroughly enjoy because you hear all of the correct intonations. Her tone is what it is intended to be. And so another thing I want you listening for as you go through this, and do be listening with a pen in your hand. Follow along with a pen in your hand, because you want to be marking logos, pathos, ethos as you go along. You want to highlight things that stand out to you. You want to put a mark next to other certain events that jump out at you. One thing that I've done on my many times through this piece is mark how many times the audience laughs, because she's reading this to a live audience. How many times the audience laughs. Now, I know what that number is, but maybe you want to count it for yourself. It's pretty interesting, because we have to keep in mind that she is reading this to an out loud audience, or to an in-present audience. And so we'll talk about that after the short story is over. But because I did place this story in the beginning of the lecture materials for this week, we're going to go ahead and include it. And so sit back and get comfortable. And we are going to listen to the story of an hour. I'm clicking it here. See if it's going to take us to the right spot. I realize I'm going to have to probably do a stop share to get you guys in the right place. Maybe it's going to start.
name of this is A Good Man is Hard to Find. The grandmother didn't want to go to Florida. She wanted to visit some of her connections in East Tennessee, and she was seizing at every chance to change Bailey's mind. Bailey was the son she lived with, her only boy. He was sitting on the edge of his chair at the table, bent over the orange sports section of the journal. "Now look here, Bailey," she said. "See here, read this." And she stood with one hand on her thin hip and the other rattling the newspaper at his bald head. "Here, this fellow that calls himself the Misfit is loose from the federal pen and headed toward Florida. And you read here what it says he did to these people. Just you read it. I wouldn't take my children in any direction with a criminal like that loose in it. I couldn't answer to my conscience if I did." Bailey didn't look up from his reading, so she wheeled around then toward the children's mother, a young woman in slacks, whose face was as broad and innocent as a cabbage, and was tied around with a green head kerchief that had 2 points on top, like rabbit's ears. She was sitting on the sofa feeding the baby his apricots out of a jar. "The children have been to Florida before," the old lady said. "You all ought to take them somewhere else for a change so they would see different parts of the world and be broad. They never have been to East Tennessee." The children's mother didn't seem to hear her, but the 8-year-old boy, John Wesley, a stocky child with glasses, said, "If you don't want to go to Florida, why don't you stay at home?" He and the little girl, June Starr, were reading the funny papers on the floor. "She wouldn't stay at home to be queen for a day," June Starr said, without raising her yellow head. "Yes, and what would you do if this fellow, the Misfit, caught you?" the grandmother asked. "I'd smack his face," John Wesley said. "She wouldn't stay at home for $1,000,000, June Starr said, afraid she'd miss something. "She has to go everywhere we go." "All right, miss," the grandmother said. "Just remember that the next time you want me to curl your hair." June Starr said her hair was naturally curly. The next morning, the grandmother was the first one in the car, ready to go. She had her big black valise that looked like the head of a hippopotamus in one corner, and underneath it she was hiding a basket with Pitty Sing, the cat, in it. She didn't intend for the cat to be left alone in the house for 3 days, because he would miss her too much, and she was afraid he might brush against one of the gas burners and accidentally asphyxiate himself. Her son Bailey didn't like to arrive at a motel with a cat. She sat in the middle of the back seat with John Wesley and June Starr on either side of her. Bailey and the children's mother and the baby sat in front, and they left Atlanta at 8:45 with the mileage on the car at 55890. The grandmother wrote this down because she thought it would be interesting to say how many miles they had been when they got back. It took them 20 minutes to reach the outskirts of the city. The old lady settled herself comfortably, removing her white cotton gloves and putting them up with her purse on the shelf in front of the back window. The children's mother still had on slacks and still had her head tied up in a green kerchief, but the grandmother had on a navy blue straw sailor hat with a bunch of white violets on the brim and a navy blue dress with a small white dot in the print. Her collars and cuffs were white organdy trimmed with lace, and at her neckline she had pinned a purple spray of cloth violets containing a sachet. In case of an accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once that she was a lady. She said she thought it was going to be a good day for driving, neither too hot nor too cold, and she cautioned Bailey that the speed limit was 55 miles an hour, and that patrolmen hid themselves behind billboards and small clumps of trees and sped out after you before you had a chance to slow down. She pointed out interesting details of the scene: Stone Mountain, the blue granite that in some places came up to both sides of the highway, the brilliant red clay banks slightly streaked with purple, and the various crops that made rows of green lacework on the ground. The trees were full of silver-white sunlight, and the meanest of them sparkled. The children were reading comic magazines, and their mother had gone back to sleep. Let's go through Georgia fast so we won't have to look at it much, John Wesley said. If I were a little boy, said the grandmother, I wouldn't talk about my native state that way. Tennessee has the mountains and Georgia has the hills. Tennessee is at the hillbilly dumping ground, John Wesley said, and Georgia is a lousy state too. You said it, June Starr said. In my time, said the grandmother, folding her thin, veined fingers, children were more respectful of their native states and their parents and everything else. People did right then. Oh, look at the cute little pickaninny, she said, and pointed to a nigger child standing in the door of the shack. Wouldn't that make a picture now, she asked. And they all turned and looked at the little nigger out the back window. He waved. He didn't have any breeches on, June Starr said. He probably didn't have any, the grandmother explained. Little niggers in the country don't have nice things like we do. If I could paint, I'd paint that picture, she said. The children exchanged comic books. The grandmother offered to hold the baby, and the children's mother passed him over the front seat to her. She set him on her knee and bounced him and told him about the things they were passing. She rolled her eyes and screwed up her mouth and stuck her leathery, thin face into his smooth, bland one. Occasionally, he gave her a faraway smile. They passed a large cotton field with 5 or 6 graves fenced in the middle of it like a small island. Well, look at the graveyard, the grandmother said, pointing it out. That was the old family burying ground. That belonged to the plantation. Where's the plantation? John Wesley asked. Gone with the wind, said the grandmother. Ha ha. When the children finished all the comic books they had bought, they opened the lunch and ate it. The grandmother ate a peanut butter sandwich and an olive and would not let the children throw the box and the paper napkins out the window. When there was nothing else to do, they played a game by choosing a cloud and making the other two guess what shape it suggested. John Wesley took one the shape of a cow, and June Starr guessed a cow, and John Wesley said no, an automobile. And June Starr said he didn't play fair, and they began to slap each other over the grandmother. The grandmother said she would tell them a story if they would keep quiet. When she told the story, she rolled her eyes and waved her head and was very dramatic. She said once when she was a maiden lady, she had been courted by Mr. Edgar Atkins Teagarden from Jasper, Georgia. She said he was a very good-looking man and a gentleman, and that he brought her a watermelon every Saturday afternoon with his initials cut in it. E.A.T. Well, one Saturday, she said, Mr. Teagarden brought the watermelon, and there was nobody at home, and he left it on the front porch and returned in his buggy to Jasper. But she never got the watermelon, she said, because a colored boy ate it when he saw the initials E.A.T. This story tickled John Wesley's funny bone, and he giggled and giggled, but June Starr didn't think it was any good. She said she wouldn't marry a man that just brought her a watermelon on Saturday. The grandmother said she would have done well to marry Mr. Teagarden because he was a gentleman and had bought Coca-Cola stock when it first came out, and that he had died only a few years ago, a very wealthy man. They stopped at the tower for barbecued sandwiches. The tower was a part stucco and part wood filling station and dance hall set in a clearing outside of Timothy. A fat man named Red Sammy Butts ran it, and there were signs stuck here and there on the building and for miles up and down the highway saying, "Try Red Sammy's famous barbecue. None like famous Red Sammy's. Red Sam, the fat boy with the happy laugh. A veteran. Red Sammy's your man." Red Sammy was lying on the bare ground outside the tower with his head under a truck, while a gray monkey about a foot high, chained to a small chinaberry tree, chattered nearby. The monkey sprang back into the tree and got on the highest limb as soon as he saw the children jump out of the car and run toward him. Inside, the tower was a long, dark room with a counter at one end and tables at the other and dancing space in the middle. They all sat down at a board table next to the Nickelodeon, and Red Sam's wife, a tall, burnt brown woman with hair and eyes lighter than her skin, came in and took their order. The children's mother put a dime in the machine and played the Tennessee Waltz, and the grandmother said that tune always made her want to dance. She asked Bailey if he would like to dance, but he only glared at her. He didn't have a naturally sunny disposition like she did, and trips made him nervous. The grandmother's brown eyes were very bright. She swayed her head from side to side and pretended she was dancing in her chair. June Starr said play something she could tap to, so the children's mother put in another dime and played a fast number, and June Starr stepped out onto the dance floor and did her tap routine. "Ain't she cute?" Red Sam's wife said, leaning over the counter. "Would you like to come be my little girl?" "No, I certainly wouldn't," June said. "I wouldn't live in a broken down place like this for $1,000,000. And she ran back to the table. "Ain't she cute?" the woman said, stretching her mouth politely. "Aren't you ashamed?" hissed the grandmother. Red Sam came in and told his wife to quit lounging on the counter and hurry up with these people's orders. His khaki trousers reached just to his hip bones, and his stomach hung over them like a sack of meal swaying under his shirt. He came over and sat down at the table nearby and let out a combination sigh and yodel. "You can't win," he said. "You can't win." And he wiped his sweating red face off with a gray handkerchief. "These days you don't know who to trust," he said. "Ain't that the truth?" "People are certainly not nice like they used to be," said the grandmother. "Two fellows come in here last week," Red Sammy said, "driving a Chrysler. It was an old beat-up car, but it was a good one, and these boys looked all right to me. Said they worked at a mill. And you know, I let them fellows charge the gas they bought. Now, why did I do that?" "Because you're a good man," the grandmother said at once. "Yes'm, I suppose so," Red Sam said, as if he was struck with his answer. His wife brought the orders, carrying the 4 plates all at once without a tray, 2 in each hand and 1 balanced on her arm. "It isn't a soul in this green world of God's that you can trust," she said. "And I don't count nobody out of that. Not nobody," she repeated, looking at Red Sam. "Did you read about that criminal, the misfit that's escaped?" asked the grandmother. "I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he didn't attack this place right here," said the woman. "If he hears about it being here, I wouldn't be none surprised to see him. If he hears it's 2 cents in the cash register, I wouldn't be at all surprised if it, that'll do," Red Sam said. "Go bring these people their Coca-Colas." And the woman went off to get the rest of the order. "A good man is hard to find," Red Sammy said. "Everything's getting terrible. I remember the day you could go off and leave your screen door unlatched. Not no more." He and the grandmother discussed better times. The old lady said that in her opinion, Europe was entirely to blame for the way things were now. She said the way Europe acted, you would think we were all made of money. And Red Sam said it was no use talking about it. She was exactly right. The children ran outside into the white sunlight and looked at the monkey in the lazy chinaberry tree. He was busy catching fleas on himself and biting each one carefully between his teeth as if it were a delicacy. They drove off again into the hot afternoon. The grandmother took cat naps and woke up every few minutes with her own snoring. Outside of Toomsboro, she woke up and recalled an old plantation that she had visited in this neighborhood once when she was a young lady. She said the house had 6 white columns across the front, and that there was an avenue of oaks leading up to it, and 2 little wooden trellis arbors on either side and front, where you sat down with your suitor after a stroll in the garden. She recalled exactly which road to turn off to get to it. She knew that Bailey would not be willing to lose any time looking at an old house, but the more she talked about it, the more she wanted to see it once again and find out if the little twin arbors were still standing. There was a secret panel in this house, she said craftily, not telling the truth but wishing that she were. And the story went that all the family silver was hidden in it when Sherman came through, suit. It was never found, though. Hey, John Wesley said, let's go see it. We'll find it. We'll poke all the woodwork and find it. Who lives there? Where do you turn off at? Hey, Pop, can't we turn off there? We never have seen a house with a secret panel, June Starr shrieked. Let's go to the house with the secret panel. Hey, Pop, can't we go see the house with the secret panel? It's not far from here, I know, the grandmother said. It wouldn't take over 20 minutes. Bailey was looking straight ahead. His jaw was as rigid as a horseshoe. No, he said. The children began to yell and scream that they wanted to see the house with the secret panel. John Wesley kicked the back of the front seat, and June Starr hung over her mother's shoulder and whined desperately into her ear that they never had any fun, even on their vacation, that they could never do what they wanted to do. The baby began to scream, and John Wesley kicked the back of the seat so hard that his father could feel the blows in his kidneys. All right, he shouted, and drew the car to a stop at the side of the road. Will you all shut up? Will you all just shut up for 1 second? If you don't shut up, we won't go anywhere. It would be very educational for them, the grandmother murmured. All right, Bailey said, but get this. This is the only time we're going to stop for anything like this. This is the one and only time. The dirt road that you have to turn down is about a mile back, the grandmother directed. I marked it when we passed. A dirt road, Bailey groaned. After they had turned around and were headed toward the dirt road, the grandmother recalled other points about the house, the beautiful glass over the front doorway and the candle lamp in the hall. John Wesley said that the secret panel was probably in the fireplace. You can't go inside this house, Bailey said. You don't know who lives there. While you all talk to people in front, I'll run around behind and get in a window, John Wesley suggested. We'll all stay in the car, his mother said. They turned onto the dirt road, and the car raced roughly along in a swirl of pink dust. The grandmother recalled the times when there were no paved roads, and 30 miles was a day's journey. The dirt road was hilly, and there were sudden washes in it, and sharp curves on dangerous embankments. All at once they would be on a hill looking down at the blue tops of trees for miles around. Then the next minute they would be in a red depression with the dust-coated trees looking down on them. This place had better turn up in a minute, Bailey said, or I'm going to turn around. The road looked as if no one had traveled on it in months. It's not much farther, the grandmother said, and just as she said it, a horrible thought came to her. The thought was so embarrassing that she turned red in the face and her eyes dilated and her feet jumped up, upsetting the valise in the corner. The instant the valise moved, the newspaper top she had over the basket under it rose with a snarl, and Pitty Sing the cat sprang onto Bailey's shoulder. The children were thrown to the floor, and their mother, clutching the baby, was thrown out the door onto the ground. The old lady was thrown into the front seat. The car turned over once and landed right side up in a gulch off the side of the road. Bailey remained in the driver's seat with the cat, gray striped with a broad white face and an orange nose, clinging to his neck like a caterpillar. As soon as the children saw they could move their arms and legs, they scrambled out of the car shouting, "We've had an accident!" The grandmother was curled up under the dashboard, hoping she was injured so that Bailey's wrath would not come down on her all at once. The horrible thought she had had before the accident was that the house she remembered so vividly was not in Georgia but in Tennessee. Bailey removed the cat from his neck with both hands and flung it out the window against the side of a pine tree. Then he got out of the car and started looking for the children's mother. She was sitting against the side of the red gutted ditch, holding the screaming baby, but she only had a cut down her face and a broken shoulder. "We've had an accident," the children screamed in a frenzy of delight. "But nobody's killed," June Starr said with disappointment as the grandmother limped out of the car, her hat still pinned to her head, with the broken front brim standing up at a jaunty angle, and the violet spray hanging off the side. They all sat down in the ditch except the children to recover from the shock. They were all shaking. "Maybe a car will come along," said the children's mother hoarsely. "I believe I have injured an organ," said the grandmother, pressing her side. But no one answered her. Bailey's teeth were clattering. He had on a yellow sports shirt with bright blue parrots behind in it, and his face was as yellow as the shirt. The grandmother decided that she would not mention that the house was in Tennessee. The road was about 10 feet above, and they could see only the tops of the trees on the other side of it. Behind the ditch they were sitting in, there were more woods, tall and dark and deep. In a few minutes they saw a car some distance away on top of a hill, coming slowly as if the occupants were watching them. The grandmother stood up and waved both arms dramatically to attract their attention. The car continued to come on slowly, disappeared around a bend, and appeared again, moving even slower on top of the hill they had gone over. It was a big, black, battered, hearse-like automobile. There were 3 men in it. It came to a stop just over them, and for some minutes the driver looked down with a steady, expressionless gaze to where they were sitting and didn't speak. Then he turned his head and muttered something to the other 2, and they got out. One was a fat boy in black trousers and a red sweatshirt with a silver stallion embossed on the front of it. He moved around on the right side of them and stood staring, his mouth partly open in a kind of loose grin. The other had on khaki pants and a blue striped coat and a gray hat pulled down very low, hiding most of his face. He came around slowly on the left side. Neither spoke. The driver got out of the car and stood by the side of it, looking down at them. He was an older man than the other 2. His hair was just beginning to gray, and he wore silver-rimmed spectacles that gave him a scholarly look. He had a long, creased face and didn't have on any shirt or undershirt. He had on blue jeans that were too tight for him and was holding a black hat and a gun. The 2 boys also had guns. "We've had an accident," the children screamed. The grandmother had the peculiar feeling that the bespectacled man was someone she knew. His face was as familiar to her as if she had known him all her life, but she could not recall who he was. He moved away from the car and began to come down the embankment, placing his feet carefully so that he wouldn't slip. He had on tan and white shoes and no socks, and his ankles were red and thin. "Good afternoon," he said. "I see you all had you a little spill." "We've turned over twice," said the grandmother. "Once," he corrected. "We've seen it happen." "Try their car and see will it run, Hiram," he said quietly to the boy with the gray hat. "What you got that gun for, John?" Wesley asked. "What you gonna do with that gun?" "Lady," the man said to the children's mother, "would you mind calling them children to sit down by you? Children make me nervous. I want all you all to sit down right there together where you are at." "What are you telling us what to do for?" June Star asked. Behind them, the line of woods gaped like a dark, open mouth. "Come here," said their mother. "Look here now," Bailey began. "We're in a predicament. We're in—" The grandmother shrieked. She scrambled to her feet and stood staring. "You're the misfit," she said. "I recognized you at once." "Yes'm," the man said, smiling slightly, as if he were pleased in spite of himself to be known. "But it would have been better for all of you, lady, if you hadn't recognized me." Bailey turned his head sharply and said something to his mother that shocked even the children. The old lady began to cry, and the misfit reddened. "Lady," he said, "don't you get upset. Sometimes a man says things that he don't mean. I don't reckon he meant to talk to you that way." "You wouldn't shoot a lady, would you?" the grandmother said, and removed a clean handkerchief from her cuff and began to slap at her eyes with it. The misfit pointed the toe of his shoe into the ground, made a little hole, and then covered it up again. "I would hate to have to," he said. "Listen," the grandmother almost screamed. "I know you're a good man. You don't look a bit like you have common blood. I know you must come from nice people. Yes, ma'am, he said. Finest people in the world. When he smiled, he showed a row of strong white teeth. God never made a finer woman than my mother, and my daddy's heart was pure gold, he said. The boy with the red sweatshirt had come around behind him and was standing with his gun at his hip. The misfit squatted down on the ground. Watch them churn, Bobby Lee, he said. You know they make me nervous. He looked at the 6 of them huddled together in front of him, and he seemed to be embarrassed, as if he couldn't think of anything to say. Ain't a cloud in the sky, he remarked, looking up at it. Don't see no sun, but don't see no cloud neither. Yes, it's a beautiful day, said the grandmother. Listen, she said, you shouldn't call yourself the misfit, because I know you're a good man at heart. I can just look at you and tell. Hush, Bailey yelled, hush. Everybody shut up and let me handle this. He was squatting in the position of a runner, about to sprint forward, but he didn't move. I appreciate that, lady, the misfit said, and drew a little circle in the ground with the butt of his gun. It'll take a half hour to fix this here car, Hiram called, looking over the raised hood of it. Well, first you and Bobby Lee get him and that little boy to step over yonder with you, the misfit said, pointing to Bailey and John Wesley. The boys want to ask you something, he said to Bailey. Would you mind stepping back in them woods there with them? Listen, Bailey began. We're in a terrible predicament. Nobody realizes what this is, and his voice cracked. His eyes were as blue and intense as the parrots in his shirt, and he remained perfectly still. The grandmother reached up to adjust her hat brim, as if she were going to the woods with him, but it came off in her hand. She stood staring at it, and after a second she let it fall on the ground. Hiram pulled Bailey up by the arm as if he were assisting an old man. John Wesley caught hold of his father's hand, and Bobby Lee followed. They went off toward the woods, and just as they reached the dark edge, Bailey turned, and supporting himself against the gray, naked pine trunk, he shouted, I'll be back in a minute, Mama. Wait on me. Come back this instant, his mother shrilled. But they all disappeared into the woods. Bailey boy, the grandmother called in a tragic voice, but she found she was looking at the misfit squatting on the ground in front of her. I just know you're a good man, she said desperately. You're not a bit common. No, I ain't a good man, the misfit said after a second, as if he had considered her statement carefully. But I ain't the worst in the world neither. My daddy said I was a different breed of dog from my brothers and sisters. You know, Daddy said, it's some that can live their whole life out without asking about it, and it's others has to know why it is. And this boy is one of the latter. He's going to be into everything. He put on his black hat and looked up suddenly, and then away deep into the woods as if he were embarrassed again. I'm sorry I don't have on a shirt before you ladies, he said, hunching his shoulders slightly. We buried our clothes that we had on when we escaped, and we're just making do until we can get better. We borrowed these from some folks we met, he explained. That's perfectly all right, the grandmother said. Maybe Bailey has an extra shirt in his suitcase. I'll look and see directly, the misfit said. Where are they taking him? The children's mother screamed. Daddy was a card himself, the misfit said. You couldn't put anything over on him. He never got in trouble with the authorities, though. He just had the knack of handling them. You could be honest, too, if you'd only try, said the grandmother. Think how wonderful it would be to settle down and live a comfortable life and not have to think about somebody chasing you all the time. The misfit kept scratching the ground with the butt of his gun, as if he were thinking about it. Yes, somebody is always after you, he murmured. The grandmother noticed how thin his shoulder blades were just behind his hat, because she was standing up looking down on him. Do you ever pray? She asked. He shook his head. All she saw was the black hat wiggle between his shoulder blades. No, he said. There was a pistol shot from the woods, followed closely by another. Then silence. The old lady's head jerked around. She could hear the wind move through the tree tops like a long, satisfied insuck of breath. Bailey boy, she called. I was a gospel singer for a while, the misfit said. I've been most everything. Been in the armed service, both land and sea, at home and abroad. Been twice married, been an undertaker, been with the railroad, plowed Mother Earth, been in a tornado, seen a man burn alive once. And he looked up at the children's mother and the little girl who was sitting close together, their faces white and their eyes glassy. I even seen a woman flogged, he said. Pray, pray, the grandmother began. Pray. I never was a bad boy that I remember of, the misfit said in an almost dreamy voice. But somewhere along the line I done something wrong and got sent to the penitentiary. I was buried alive, and he looked up and held her attention to him by a steady stare. That's when you should have started to pray, she said. What did you do to get sent to the penitentiary that first time? Turn to the right was a wall, the misfit said, looking up again at the cloudless sky. Turn to the left, it was a wall. Look up, it was a ceiling. Look down, it was a floor. I forget what I done, lady. I sat there trying to remember what it was I done, and I ain't recalled it to this day. Once in a while I would think it was coming to me, but it never come. Maybe they put you in by mistake, the old lady said. No, he said, it wasn't no mistake. They had the papers on me. You must have stolen something, she said. The misfit sneered slightly. Nobody had nothing I wanted, he said. It was a head doctor at the penitentiary. Said what I had done was kill my daddy, but I known that for a lie. My daddy died in 1919 of epidemic flu, and I never had a thing to do with it. He was buried in the Mount Hopewell Baptist churchyard, and you can go there and see for yourself. If you would pray, the old lady said, Jesus would help you. That's right, the misfit said. Well, then why don't you pray, she asked, trembling with delight suddenly. I don't need no help, he said. I'm doing all right by myself. Bobby Lee and Hiram came ambling back from the woods. Bobby Lee was dragging a yellow shirt with bright blue parrots in it. Throw me that shirt, Bobby Lee, the misfit said. The shirt came flying at him and landed on his shoulder when he put it on. The grandmother couldn't name what the shirt reminded her of. No, lady, the misfit said while he was buttoning it up. I found out the crime don't matter. You can do one thing, you can do another. Kill a man or take a tire off his car. Because sooner or later, you're going to forget what it was you done and just be punished for it. The children's mother had begun to make heaving noises as if she couldn't get her breath. Lady, he asked, would you and that little girl like to step off yonder with Bobby Lee and Hiram and join your husband? Yes, thank you, the mother said faintly. Her left arm dangled helplessly, and she was holding the baby who had gone to sleep in the other. Help that lady up, Hiram, the misfit said as she struggled to climb out of the ditch. And Bobby Lee, you hold on to that little girl's hand. I don't want to hold hands with him, June Starr said. He reminds me of a pig. The fat boy blushed and laughed and caught her by the arm and pulled her off into the woods after Hiram and her mother. Alone with the misfit, the grandmother found that she had lost her voice. There was not a cloud in the sky, nor any sun. There was nothing around her but woods. She wanted to tell him that he must pray. She opened and closed her mouth several times before anything came out. Finally, she found herself saying, Jesus, Jesus, meaning Jesus will help you. But the way she was saying it, it sounded as if she might be cursing. Yassam, the misfit said, as if he agreed. Jesus thrown everything off balance. It was the same case with him as with me, except he hadn't committed any crime, and they could prove I had committed one because they had the papers on me. Of course, he said, they never show me my papers. That's why I sign myself now. I said long ago, you get you a signature and sign everything you do and keep a copy of it. Then you'll know what you've done, and you can hold up the crimes of the punishment and see that they match. And in the end, you'll have something to prove you ain't been treated right. I call myself a misfit, he said, because I can't make what all I done wrong fit all I gone through in punishment. There was a piercing scream from the woods, followed closely by a pistol report. Does it seem right to you, lady, that one is punished a heap and another ain't punished at all? Jesus, the old lady cried, you've got good blood. I know you wouldn't shoot a lady. I know you come from nice people. Pray. Jesus, you ought not to shoot a lady. I'll give you all the money I've got. Lady, the misfit said, looking beyond her far into the woods, there never was a body that give the undertaker a tip. There were 2 more pistol reports, and the grandmother raised her head like a parched old turkey hen crying for water, and called, "Bailey boy, Bailey boy," as if her heart would break. Jesus was the only one that ever raised the dead, the misfit continued, and he shouldn't have done it. He's thrown everything off balance. If he did what he said, then it's nothing for you to do but throw away everything and follow him. And if he didn't, then it's nothing for you to do but enjoy the few minutes you got left the best way you can, by killing somebody or burning down his house or doing some other meanness to him. No pleasure but meanness, he said, and his voice had become almost a snarl. Maybe he didn't raise the dead, the old lady mumbled, not knowing what she was saying, and feeling so dizzy that she sank down in the ditch with her legs twisted under her. "I wasn't there, so I can't say he didn't," the misfit said. "I wished I had been there," he said, hitting the ground with his fist. "It ain't right I wasn't there, because if I had been there, I would have known. Listen, lady," he said in a high voice, "if I had been there, I would have known, and I wouldn't be like I am now." His voice seemed about to crack, and the grandmother's head cleared for an instant. She saw the man's face twisted close to her own, as if he were going to cry, and she murmured, "Why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children." She reached out and touched him on the shoulder. The misfit sprang back as if a snake had bitten him and shot her 3 times through the chest. Then he put his gun down on the ground and took off his glasses and began to clean them. Hiram and Bobby Lee returned from the woods and stood over the ditch, looking down at the grandmother, who half sat and half lay in a puddle of blood, with her legs crossed under her like a child's, and her face smiling up at the cloudless sky. Without his glasses, the misfit's eyes were red-rimmed and pale and defenseless looking. "Take her off and throw her where you thrown the others," he said, picking up the cat that was rubbing itself against his leg. "She was a talker, wasn't she?" Bobby Lee said, sliding down the ditch with a yodel. "She would have been a good woman," the misfit said, "if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life." "Some fun," Bobby Lee said. "Shut up, Bobby Lee," the misfit said. "It's no real pleasure in life."
All right, that was A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. So I'm sure that everyone's got specific reactions at this point, which is completely normal for this short story, because we are not in the classroom together. Obviously, I keep saying that, but we're not going to be able to have an actual in-person discussion. But these are the questions that you will walk through when you are completing your worksheet. Actually, I think your worksheet might have a couple of more questions on it, which I've added since creating this PowerPoint. So take your time and go through those. Do stop and take a look at what's the historical situation going on here. When did she write this? It's always important to dig in and look at when was the piece written. So what's going on in the world at that time? What is the writer responding to? So we need to know where she lived, what she was going through. So this takes us into number 3 as well. So where did she live? What was she going through in her life? Why this type of a story? Why would she write this awful thing? Which you can't tell me that your first reaction to this isn't, oh. Most people are horrified. Most people say, why did you read that to us? Most people are like, I hated it. I'm confused. Like, normally the reactions to this piece are somewhat negative. And so then you're going to be asking, well, then why would you include it? I include it because in retrospect, it's a very beautiful piece of literature. And the message inside of it is profound and deep. So we have to look for it in order to find it. And Flannery did that on purpose. She wrote it this way on purpose. So we need to know some things about her. What can we know about her? I'm going to go ahead and give you just a little bit of information, even though I want you to be looking up for yourself and verifying this for yourself. But Flannery O'Connor, she struggled with a terminal illness. When she was a young woman, she was diagnosed with lupus. Now, back in the 50s, this is a long time ago, we're talking 70 years ago, they wouldn't have had the medicines and the cures and the treatments that we have today. And so when you were diagnosed with lupus back in those days, it was pretty much a death sentence. It killed her father when she was about 15, I believe. Her father died with lupus. And so she's diagnosed with it, and she's living with this. She's not expecting to live a long time. So let's ask ourselves a question here. If you were a person of strong convictions, and if you read more about Flannery's life, you will discover she was a person of strong convictions. She had a lot of very definitive feelings on religion and God and hypocrisy and just very strong thoughts and ideas. But you have to dig in and find those. So if you had strong opinions and ideas, and you had a terminal illness and knew that you were not going to live for very long, and you had a burdening desire to write, what would you write? What would you write about? What would you want to live longer than you that came from you? Excellent questions. Something to think about when we're looking at a woman who knew that she had a terminal illness. That's people always say, if you knew you had a day left to live, what would you do with your day? Well, we're looking at a situation here with a woman who this was her life. She knew that she was sick. She knew that she was going to die. And so she wrote this story. Number 4, what do you think is the author's intended meaning? Why did Flannery write this? Now, fortunately for you, in the textbook, there is, right after the story, there is a section called Mysteries and Manners, I believe. I don't have the book right in front of me. But if you read that section, you're going to have in Flannery's own words why she wrote A Good Man is Hard to Find. For those of you who are struggling to find the meaning right off the bat, read that. All of you should read that. But read that. And in those words, you will discover why she wrote this and what she feels the message of the piece is. It's shocking. It's surprising when you figure it out. And when you might read it, you might go, really? Or you might go, oh. But it's one of those that we sit back and we reflect on. And over time, the appreciation can build for how she crafted this piece, which then leads us, of course, into number 5, those literary elements, things that she specifically chose. The setting, right? The different characters, the fact that none of the female characters had names, just the male characters. Anybody catch that? Right? There are different things here. Symbolism, we have tone, we have definitely, we can talk about point of view, we have some irony, we've got multiple types of conflict. So what do you want to talk about that she specifically did with literary elements to bring her story to that meaning that she says it had? And the rhetorical elements, logos, pathos, and ethos. What in the story is logical? What in the story is ethical or credible? And then what in the story is made just to cause you to feel? Do you believe the author was effective in the message? And then how does the story impact you? Those are all excellent questions. And if we were in the classroom together, we would have this big discussion in the room together. But I'm not going to do that because you're not with me, but I also want you to be coming to your conclusions on your own. So I'm not going to give you my opinion in the lecture video. But we are, there was a slide with a bunch of information about Flannery O'Connor, which you can flip through the slides on your own and come to. The PowerPoint is available to you just like every week. So there it is. On page 1003 in your textbook, Flannery is going to give you in her own words what the message of the story is. Peacocks. Maybe you will have read that she raised peacocks on the little farm where she lived with her mother. All right, so let's talk about discernment. Just because I'm right, it doesn't mean you're wrong. Don't we live in a world where we think if we're right, then everyone else is wrong? And if I'm wrong, then you must be right. We don't see that there perhaps might be shades. Discernment. How do we determine what is right? What is almost right? How do we decide where we want to be on those things? And then here's another one of these wonderful little depictions of argument. As a human race, if we could just start to get that about each other, if we could just start to practice some discernment, some ability to stop and to consider what might be obscure or what we need to understand about the other side. Good stuff. Moving on. Right versus wrong, how to discern the difference. I found this article and I am going to read this because I feel like this is a great piece on understanding this idea. This was written by David Schenecker, master's student at Liberty University, an MBA with a focus in economics. This was written January the 10th of 2021. This may seem trivial, as most of what we know about what is right and wrong comes from our parents as kids. Do this, don't do that, avoid this group of people, and so on. However, there really is no one way to differentiate between right and wrong, as it's completely subjective. Now, I'm not talking about the legal and civil laws that bind us as a society. These are created to form natural barriers that help all individuals understand basic rights and give everyone guardrails to live by. I believe most everyone has seen a depiction of the angel and devil on a person's shoulders counseling us as we struggle with tough, crucial decisions. My favorite example of this is from The Emperor's New Groove. If you haven't watched the movie, I highly recommend it. It definitely has some great lines in there. As a kid, I grew up with these cartoon examples that taught me a lot about ethics and morals. In this particular case, Crunk is debating rescuing Kuzco as he is about to cascade off a ridiculously tall waterfall as he is trapped in a tied sack. I have embedded the small clip of it, so click the picture for a short laugh. Of course, I didn't copy that over. Now, your dilemmas may not be as life-threatening or as comical as Crunk's, but let's face it, everyone has had these moments where we all need to make tough or challenging decisions. It may be a crucial conversation with our bosses at work. It may be a tough conversation to uphold the standard at work. Regardless of this situation, knowing the difference between right and wrong, ethical or not, having the courage to choose is a game changer. This paradox is something educators, business leaders, political leaders, and pretty much everyone still wrestles with. This is why there hasn't been any universal standard implemented for determining what is ultimately right and ultimately wrong. We all hold our own beliefs, and we filter our individual decisions through our own personal values and principles. This isn't something that can be imposed on another free-thinking human being. However, if the inverse occurs, different standards can be imposed on others that hold a particular decision unacceptable. Ultimately, this is why leaders need discernment to navigate our global and diverse community. Discernment, as it's defined, is the quality of being able to grasp or comprehend what is obscure, or the skill of discerning. In order to understand right from wrong at its core, leaders must be able to understand their own unique values and principles. As I researched this topic, I found many interesting and incredibly deep articles by some fantastic researchers across several industries. Gretchen M. Wilhelm and Michael W. Furman, in their article Character Education, Christian Education Perspectives, assert that Character education means coming to understand, care about, and practice virtue. Lacona echoes this logic when he offers this very concise definition of character. Good character consists of knowing the good, desiring the good, and doing the good. Fundamentally, the question of right and wrong is impossible, hold on just a second here, to answer without our own value system set firmly in place. This is why it's important for all of us to understand that there are only a few overarching principles that everyone can be held to. One of those is the golden rule or gold standard. Anyone you interact with can easily understand that it's always wise to treat everyone the way you wish to be treated. That basic principle is shared across cultures and is just good common sense. Another universal principle is that you reap what you sow. If your intention is to reap positivity, then you must also show positivity. Even if our definitions of right and wrong don't match, we can still make a difference in our world if we are truly looking to add value to one another. So, discernment. How to navigate these hard questions of what is right and what is wrong, what is right and what is almost right. And this guy is saying, it really comes down to treat other people the way you want to be treated. If you want to be listened to, then you need to listen to others, right? Maybe don't be so staunch in your opinion. Be willing to listen. Be willing to understand where someone is coming from. Be willing to listen past someone's ideas and opinions to the why of it. Now, that article I found on LinkedIn. Aristotle said, we should conduct ourselves toward others as we would have them act toward us. So see, it's not just a biblical principle. Some of you might be feeling like, well, that's from the Bible. I don't care about that, right? Aristotle said it too. Like David said in his article, it's just common sense. We should conduct ourselves toward others as we would have them act toward us. That's discerning. So let's talk about assumptions. All right. We need to define what assumptions are. I found this great quote when I was looking up some information about assumptions. We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are, and we tend to make our ideas and impressions based off of the way we see things. And so then we develop assumptions and biases. So from the textbook, we've got some information on assumptions. First thing we need to do with them is identify them. We need to understand assumptions do lead us to call certain things evidence that are not evidence. We need to be asking, what does the audience require to accept your assumptions? Do you want your audience to accept your assumptions about historical periods and culture, about human nature, about literature, your values and experiences? If you want them to be able to accept your assumptions, you have to be able to back these things up with evidence. So we need to be able to take our assumptions into being claims backed up with evidence, supported with actual verifiable information. And we don't want to be judgmental. We want to be open and ask questions, allow questions, treat others as we want to be treated. So I put up here in the top corner, assumptions can lead us to call certain things evidence, like memes, politicians, news anchors who don't question the existence of bots or the existence of bots, etc. There are a lot of things floating around on the internet that lead us to not question things, that lead us to just accept other people's ideas as, oh, it must have merit and value because I've read it on the internet. We need to be willing to question those things. And I just love this. We're all different. Don't judge, understand instead. It is discerning to understand that we're all different, and therefore we have different opinions and different values. We sit down and we ask ourselves, what is right and what is wrong? And I love A Good Man is Hard to Find for this, because in that story, the whole title is A Good Man is Hard to Find. So we define good. Who is good in that story? Is the grandmother good? Outwardly, yes. Outwardly, she's prim, she's proper, she's dressed like a lady, she's got a little hat on, she's got some flowers, a little doily on her neck, so that anyone who would come across them would know that she was a lady. But internally, selfish. Even as her family's being shot in the woods, she's still saying, "You wouldn't shoot a lady." Is the grandmother good? Is the misfit good? Is the misfit bad? He gives us his resume at one point, doesn't he? He's a been there, done that kind of guy. Served in the military, been an undertaker, had a great family, knows about Jesus. Somewhere along the way, he did something he got locked up for. He doesn't even know what it was, but he's kind of gone, F it, right? All right. If they're going to tell me I'm bad, I'll be bad. So is he bad? Is he not bad? What about Red Sammy? The grandmother tells him he's a good man. Why does she tell him he's a good man? Because he agrees with her political opinions? That makes him good? His wife isn't so much a fan of him. We can tell that from the text. His wife doesn't think he's so much a good man. It's subjective, good and bad. This is why we need discernment. This is why we need the ability to understand how different we all are and to look deeper, to ask the why, to be a listener, and to understand. We need to look harder. In that piece on page 1003, where you're reading what Flannery O'Connor has said about the story herself, she says that it is her hope, even though she never ended up writing this, it is her hope that the misfit would go on to become the prophet he was meant to be. Did you catch that? So in Flannery's mind, was the misfit bad? Was he good? Maybe she's saying he has the capacity for good. What do you think? Do we all have good and bad inside of us? Can we be discerning about people? Can we ask questions and dig into this idea that maybe not any of us are all good, not any of us are all bad? It's subjective. Oh, can I go back? Refusal to accept that opinions other than your own exist do make an argument impossible. So these are some points to remember about argument. These are from the other week. Be tolerant or don't. Successful communicators participate in true argument. This is indicative of emotional intelligence, being able to understand that opinions can exist other than your own. Make sure you understand a person's argument before reacting. Know the why. So in this class, we will be respectful, we will be listeners, and we will look for the why, because this is what's necessary in order for us to be discerning and effective. So the assignment for this week is to do, it does say read chapters 2 and 5, but that's suggested reading. I'm not holding you to that, and it's not on your course schedule. But you've got your Blackboard questions regarding A Good Man is Hard to Find. And then next week's class, let me make sure that I'm saying this correctly. Yes, next week's class is peer review. So week 7, we are doing peer review, and that's exciting. So we will have a brief introduction to peer review next week in a lecture format, and then I will be available as you all are participating in that peer review next week. So, all right, make sure that you get your rough drafts are turned in 2 spots. They need to be turned in your peer review group. Whether you're using Wiki or File Exchange, that's up to you and your group. And then you also want to make sure it's turned in the rough draft spot. I need it in both places. All right, so both places in order for you to get the points for this process. All right, so next week, open up the video on peer review, and then you will be spending some time reading through your group mates' papers, and you will make comments and critiques on them and then re-upload them back into your peer review group before the end of the week. There is a date on the assignment sheet that says when those need to be re-uploaded. So with that, I'm going to switch that to stop share and drop us down into here. And so today's lecture wasn't really super long. It really was about the story, though had we been in the classroom and had an internal class discussion on this story, it would have lasted much longer because there's much to dig into, and I want to leave you with this word. The word is grace. Flannery says this is a story about grace. Does that help you dig into it? Look for the grace in the story. Okay. With that, I'm going to say have a super week, and I will talk to you soon.